Do you ever feel nervous when you stand up and speak? Or have you ever been nervous in any other experience or activity? This Toastmaster, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you, what was the moment, the actual moment, the trigger that set the nerves off? I believe there's 5 stages of nerves. I believe the first stage is the trigger, that instant, that something that sets it off. The trigger leads to the thought leads to the emotion affects the physiology, and the physiology affects the behaviour. But before I go into that, let me take you back. It was August 1974. I was just in my early 20s and I was best man at my friend's wedding. Now, it all seemed so easy. I mean, I arranged the stag night. I made sure he had a good time, but he wasn't actually out of his mind. I got him up in the morning. We got to the church on time. He looked respectable. I had the ring in my pocket. I didn't forget it. And it's still in my pocket somewhere. And the church went well. But then we came to this reception. I made sure everything was handled. I let him have fun. I sorted out all the issues, the people issues. Everything was fine. I was enjoying it. I was organising it. And then we sat down. And it hit me. In a few moments, I had to stand up and speak. And that's when I felt it. The trigger for me, instantly, I felt that deep, solid feeling in my stomach. I could feel 80 pairs of eyes boring into me. And I stood up to speak, and I froze for those first 5 seconds. My mouth was dry. I had to take a sip of wine. I didn't have water, like a fool. I started rambling. I read the telegrams, and, Anthony, telegrams were things we had in the days before email for long distance things. I read the telegrams, and even though I said I wasn't going to, I then proceeded to read every one of the 25 different cards, bit by bit, because I was so nervous and didn't know what else to do. I stuttered, I spluttered, and I made a complete fool of myself. To try and realise all I had to do to end my misery was to pick up the glass and toast the bride and groom. And I sat down, humiliated, relieved, and ashamed. So then, that's where I believe the 5 stages come from. But let me take you through to the 5 stages. I mentioned the trigger. It starts with the trigger. What sets it off? And the trigger will be different things for different people. For some, it may be when your boss tells you you're doing a talk next week, or you get an email. For some, it might be as you go to bed the night before, or waking up in the morning, or driving to the venue, or sitting in the audience waiting. For me, it's that moment, just those few moments before, those few minutes or that minute or so before, that's when it hits me. And immediately, the trigger goes straight to the thoughts. Now, when I was at the wedding, my thoughts were, I'm going to make a complete fool of myself. I'm going to be humiliated. They're all looking at me with sort of glaring eyes. What are your thoughts? My thoughts these days are, have I prepared? And that was a thought I had then. Have I done enough preparation? Ask yourself, what are your thoughts? Your thoughts will lead on to the emotion. Now, there are lots of emotions, of course. We know there are many emotions. There's sadness. But when it comes to speaking, we tend to think of fear, anxiety, perhaps humiliation. There might be resignation. I'm going to make a right mess of this. And it could be exhilaration. It could be joy. There could be happiness at doing it. And it could be panic. Mine at the time was about panic, humiliation, and my emotion was shame. How was I going to get around it? I hadn't done enough preparation. So you have to ask yourself, what is the thoughts that go on in your mind, and what's the emotion that drags in? But next thing from the thoughts and the emotion is your physiology. Now, I stood up and feeling panic, humiliated, doubtful. Was I standing strong? No. I was hunched. I was looking down at my notes. I was fumbling with the cards all the time, reading notes. Eye contact, if I looked at someone's eyes, they'd have been staring straight at me. So I avoided all eye contact. I'd look down or I'd look up. And as for smiling, gosh, no, you don't smile at this sort of thing, do you? So that was my physiology. When it comes to the behaviour, now if your physiology is like that, if you've got the trigger that sets the thought, that sets the emotion of fear and panic, that sets that physiology of looking down, looking unimportant, what's your behaviour like to be? I was rushing, speaking fast. The faster you speak, the quicker you get it over with. And the quicker you get it over with, the more likely you are to trip over. And that's what I was like, tripping over my words. But it wasn't hardly noticeable. People couldn't hear because I was mumbling. But I could feel that quivering voice inside my stomach. I could see my hand shaking, holding that card. And I just longed to finish it. So that takes me on to what do we do about those stages? How do you take those stages? You see, if I was to tell myself, my young 20-year-old, about the 5 stages and some ideas as to how to get round nerves, and this isn't about giving you tips, this is just letting you be aware of the stages. If I was to say that, I'd tell myself, okay, that's fine. You know what? It's okay to be nervous. Even famous actors are nervous and petrified before going on stage. But they use those nerves. It's part of it. And the other thing is to plan, to prepare, to rehearse, and internalize, not memorize. I hadn't done any of that the first time I spoke. So the final thing is to ask yourself, if you were to look at when you speak, go back and look at all your times you've spoken and just think, what were the stages? What could you have done to change those stages? Because every one of you, it's your birthright to speak up. So I urge you to stand up, step up, speak up with joy and exhilaration and banish those fears.